The cabin lights dimmed as the flight attendants prepared for takeoff, their smiles professional but tired. The hum of the engines filled the air, an almost soothing white noise for the weary passengers boarding the red-eye from New York to London. Among them was Michael Grayson, a self-made tech millionaire who had reluctantly traded his downtown office for the cramped comfort of first class. Michael wasn't one for luxuries, despite his wealth. He was a man who lived by spreadsheets and deadlines, not indulgence. Yet tonight, something felt different. Restless energy buzzed under his skin, as if the universe was shifting in ways he couldn't predict. He settled into his seat, his leather carry-on tucked neatly beneath his feet. The pre-flight announcements droned on as he flipped through emails on his phone, barely registering the quiet commotion behind him. "Excuse me, sir? May I sit here?" The voice froze Michael mid-scroll. Familiar, haunting, and laced with a touch of nervous energy, it sent an electric jolt down his spine. Slowly, he turned his head, and his breath caught. Standing before him, dressed in a tailored navy blazer and slim-fit jeans, was Elena Ford. Elena, the woman who had once been the center of his universe. The woman who had vanished from his life 5 years ago without a trace. The shock was mutual. Elena's wide hazel eyes locked onto his, her perfectly composed exterior cracking for a fleeting second. She hesitated, then gestured toward the window seat beside him. "It's the only spot left. Do you mind?" Michael's tongue felt heavy, his thoughts scrambling like chess pieces in a game he hadn't agreed to play. Finally, he managed a curt nod, his mind racing with questions. She slid into the seat, her perfume, a tantalizing mix of sandalwood and citrus, stirring memories Michael thought he'd buried. The seconds stretched into an eternity as the plane taxied down the runway. He knew he should say something, but the words jammed in his throat. It was Elena who broke the silence as the plane ascended into the dark expanse of night. "Small world, huh?" she said, her voice light but her tone betraying the tension beneath. Michael forced a thin smile. "You could say that." Their conversation was a careful dance around the obvious. She asked about his work, and he kept his answers vague. He returned the favor, inquiring casually about her life. Elena deflected with the ease of someone skilled at dodging deeper truths. But the tension snapped when the turbulence began. At first, it was a minor jolt, just enough to make the cabin ripple with murmurs. Then came a sudden drop that had passengers gripping their armrests. The seatbelt sign blinked on, with a shrill ding, as a voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Michael's heart raced, but his gaze flicked to Elena. She was gripping the armrest, her knuckles white, but it wasn't fear of the turbulence that had her frozen. She was staring straight ahead, her lips moving soundlessly. "Elena?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. She didn't answer, her eyes darting to the seat in front of him. Michael followed her gaze and froze. Tucked into the pocket of the seat was a photo. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, but then he saw it. It was a picture of him. Not just any picture. It was from 6 years ago, a candid shot taken during a private charity gala. He was smiling, holding a glass of champagne. And standing beside him in the photo was Elena. "What the hell is this?" Michael whispered, pulling the photo from the seat pocket. Elena's face went pale. She leaned closer, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. "Michael, listen to me. Don't make a scene." "A scene?" he hissed. "Why is this here? How does someone on this flight have a picture of us?" Elena glanced around, her eyes scanning the cabin as if searching for something or someone. "It's not safe to talk here. Trust me." Michael was about to demand an explanation when another jolt rocked the plane. This time, it wasn't turbulence. A scream erupted from the back of the cabin. Passengers turned in their seats, straining to see what had happened. Then came the announcement, sharp and panicked. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. Please remain calm. We've had an unauthorized breach of the cockpit." The words hit Michael like a sledgehammer. He turned to Elena, his instincts on high alert. But instead of fear, her expression was something else entirely. It was guilt. "Elena," Michael said, his voice low and steady, "what do you know about this?" Before she could answer, the plane jolted violently and the lights flickered. Chaos erupted. Passengers screamed. Luggage tumbled from the overhead bins. Elena grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his skin. "Michael, if you want to live, you have to trust me." Her words sent a chill down his spine, but before he could respond, the cabin plunged into darkness. The cabin was a symphony of chaos, shouts, crying, and the panicked buzz of flight attendants rushing to control the situation. The flickering lights cast eerie shadows over the passengers, their faces pale with fear. Michael's grip on the armrest tightened as he tried to process what Elena had just said. "Elena," he hissed, his voice barely audible over the noise. "What do you mean? What's going on?" Her gaze darted to the aisle, then back to him, her expression torn. She leaned closer, her voice a whisper in his ear. "This flight isn't random. Someone knew we'd both be on it. They planted that photo. They're sending a message." Michael's heart pounded as her words sank in. "What kind of message? And why me?" Elena didn't get the chance to answer. The plane jolted again, the nose tipping forward slightly before steadying. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, strained but trying to sound composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are handling this situation. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." But the panic only grew. Michael's thoughts raced. His life was built on logic and problem-solving, but this was a situation he couldn't calculate his way out of. Elena's cryptic warnings only added to his confusion. "Start talking," he demanded, his voice low but firm. "What's happening, Elena? And don't give me the trust me routine. I need answers." Elena hesitated, her lips pressing into a tight line as she glanced around the cabin. Finally, she exhaled, the weight of her secrets visibly cracking her composure. "5 years ago, I got involved with people I shouldn't have," she began. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "Dangerous people. I thought I could handle it, thought I could outsmart them. But I was wrong." Michael's stomach tightened. "What kind of people?" Elena's gaze darkened. "Let's just say they deal in information, and they're very good at finding people's weaknesses. Yours, mine, everyone's." Michael's throat went dry. "You're saying this is about me?" "It's about both of us," she admitted. "They think I have something that belongs to them, and they think you're the key to getting it." Michael's anger flared. "What could I possibly have to do with any of this? I haven't seen you in years, Elena. You disappeared." "I had to," she snapped, her voice barely above a whisper. "You think I wanted to? I left to protect you, Michael. Because if I hadn't, you'd already be dead." The weight of her words hung in the air, suffocating him. Michael opened his mouth to reply, but a new voice interrupted. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention?" The voice was calm, almost unnervingly so, and it didn't come from the intercom. It came from the aisle. Michael turned and saw him, a man in a tailored gray suit, standing near the center of the cabin. His face was unremarkable, but his presence radiated a quiet authority that silenced the murmurs around him. "Good," the man said, smiling faintly as the passenger's attention shifted to him. "Now that I have your focus, let's make this simple." In his hand was a small, black device. It looked like a remote, but Michael didn't need to be a tech genius to know it wasn't for a television. "We're not here to hurt anyone," the man continued, his voice measured and polite. "We're simply looking for two people, Michael Grayson and Elena Ford. If you'd both kindly make your way to the front of the cabin, this will be over quickly." Every pair of eyes turned toward them. Michael's blood ran cold. "Elena," he whispered, his voice sharp, "what the hell did you drag me into?" She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed his arm, her nails digging in painfully. "Don't move," she whispered. The man in the aisle glanced at a passenger near him, a nervous-looking man clutching his briefcase like a life raft. "You," the man said, gesturing with the remote. "Stand up." The passenger froze, his face pale. "Now," the man said, his smile vanishing. The passenger rose shakily, and with a press of a button on the remote, a sharp, deafening crack filled the cabin. The man screamed, clutching his briefcase as the sound of electricity coursing through the air echoed. He collapsed into his seat, convulsing, before going still. Panic erupted. Passengers screamed, some standing, others shrinking into their seats. Michael felt his pulse thunder in his ears as he tried to comprehend what had just happened. "Enough," the man said, his voice slicing through the chaos. "I don't like repeating myself. Michael Grayson. Elena Ford. Stand up." Michael's body screamed at him to stay seated, but Elena's grip on his arm was ironclad. "What's the plan?" he whispered harshly, his heart pounding like a drum. Her lips barely moved as she replied, "We don't have one." Michael stared at her, his shock turning into anger. "That's not an option." Before Elena could respond, the man in the aisle tilted his head, his eyes scanning the cabin. "I know you're here," he said, his tone almost casual. "And if I have to search for you, the next demonstration won't be so gentle." Michael's jaw clenched. He felt the weight of every passenger's gaze, their fear palpable. And then it hit him, a flash of memory, a seemingly innocuous detail from moments earlier. "The photo." "Elena," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "Where's the photo?" She hesitated, then reached into her blazer pocket, pulling out the picture of them from the gala. "Why does it matter now?" "Because," Michael said, his mind working furiously, "this isn't just about us. It's about what they think we know. And that photo isn't just a threat. It's a clue." Elena stared at him, realization dawning. The man in the aisle stepped closer. Last chance. Michael's mind raced. Time was running out. And if they didn't act fast, the next move would be out of their hands. The tension in the cabin was unbearable, the air thick with fear as passengers sat frozen, waiting for someone to move. The man in the aisle stood still, his calm demeanor more terrifying than any threat he could have made. Michael's eyes flicked between the man with the device and Elena, the weight of the situation pressing on him. His mind worked frantically. Who was this man? What did he really want? And why did he seem so certain that Michael and Elena were key to something bigger? "We don't have time," Elena hissed under her breath, her eyes darting toward the man. "Whatever plan you're cooking up, make it fast." Michael clenched his jaw, his gaze locking on the photo in her trembling hand. It felt surreal, this grainy snapshot of them smiling years ago, back when the world was simpler. But now it was a trigger, a puzzle piece he didn't yet understand. "You said this wasn't random," Michael whispered, leaning closer. "That someone planned this. So why this flight? Why now?" Elena shook her head, her voice trembling. "Because they've been watching. I didn't think they'd find us, not like this. I didn't know. Didn't know what? Michael pressed. Before she could answer, the man with the remote took a step closer, his eyes scanning the rows. "Tick-tock," he said, tapping the device. "You're testing my patience." Michael felt the pressure mount. Every instinct screamed at him to protect himself, to distance himself from Elena and her enigmatic ties to this chaos. Yet, something inside him, some lingering echo of the man who once loved her, made him stay. "Elena," Michael said, his voice firm, "you have to trust me. Whatever this is, we're in it together now." Her gaze softened, and for a moment, the chaos seemed to fade. But before she could respond, the cabin erupted in another flash of panic. A second man emerged from the galley at the front of the plane, this one armed with a weapon that looked more sci-fi than real. A sleek, metallic gun with a glowing blue core. "Stand down," the new arrival barked, his voice sharp. The suited man with the remote raised his hand slightly, a smirk on his face. "Relax, Isaac. Just handling business." Isaac's eyes narrowed. "The captain says no casualties unless absolutely necessary. You know the rules." Michael exchanged a glance with Elena, her face pale. Whoever these people were, they were organized, military, maybe, or something darker. The suited man shrugged. "Fair enough. But if Grayson and Ford don't come forward now, I'm not playing babysitter anymore." The mention of their names sent a ripple through the cabin. A murmur of recognition swept through the passengers. "They're on this flight?" A woman whispered nervously. Michael's heart sank. It was only a matter of time before someone pointed them out. He turned to Elena, his voice low and urgent. "If we wait, they'll flush us out anyway. We need to make our move now." Elena's eyes darted around the cabin, calculating. "If we go to them, they'll take us somewhere else, somewhere worse. But if we stay, we put everyone on this plane at risk." Michael felt the weight of her words. He wasn't just making a choice for himself anymore. The terrified faces around him reminded him that hundreds of lives hung in the balance. Before he could decide, a passenger 2 rows ahead pointed toward them. "It's them. They've been whispering this whole time." The suited man's eyes snapped to their row, a predator locking onto its prey. He started down the aisle, his movements deliberate. "Michael," Elena said, her voice tight with fear. "We have to run." "Run where?" Michael asked, his pulse racing. "We're 30,000 feet in the air." But Elena wasn't waiting for his permission. She grabbed his wrist and yanked him out of his seat just as the man lunged. "Get back here," he barked, his calm facade finally breaking. Passengers screamed as Michael and Elena stumbled into the aisle, knocking over trays and bags as they made their way toward the back of the plane. The cabin was chaos, a cacophony of voices, and the heavy thud of boots as the second man, Isaac, joined the pursuit. "This way," Elena shouted, dragging Michael toward the emergency exit. Michael balked. "Are you insane?" "We can't. They're not going to kill us yet," she interrupted. "They need us alive. But if we can slow them down." Her words were cut off as Isaac fired his weapon, the blue glow lighting up the cabin. The blast struck the wall inches from Michael's head, leaving a scorched mark and a faint smell of burning metal. Michael ducked instinctively, his adrenaline surging. "That's not reassuring." Elena ignored him, her focus on the exit. She yanked open the small storage compartment beneath it, revealing an emergency parachute pack. "No way," Michael said, his voice shaking. "Michael, trust me," she pleaded, shoving the pack into his arms. "It's this or we die here." The sound of heavy footsteps grew louder. The men were closing in. Michael's mind raced, his logic battling against the raw, primal instinct to survive. He glanced at Elena, her face determined despite the fear in her eyes. "You're insane," he muttered, strapping the pack onto his back. Elena nodded grimly. "You wouldn't love me any other way." Before he could respond, she reached for the emergency handle and twisted it. The door blew open with a deafening roar, the cabin depressurizing instantly. Passengers screamed as oxygen masks deployed, and loose objects were sucked toward the gaping void. The force nearly knocked Michael off his feet, but Elena grabbed his arm, anchoring him. "Jump!" she screamed over the chaos. Michael hesitated for a fraction of a second, the sheer insanity of the moment paralyzing him. But then Isaac appeared at the edge of the aisle, his weapon raised. "Now!" Elena shouted, and this time, Michael didn't argue. He leapt into the void, the freezing wind tearing at his face as the world became a blur of stars and darkness. Elena followed a split second later, her scream lost in the roar of the night sky. Behind them, the plane dwindled into the distance, the faint glow of its cabin lights disappearing into the blackness. As Michael plummeted, his thoughts jumbled and chaotic, one thing became crystal clear. This was only the beginning. The roar of the wind swallowed everything as Michael hurtled through the dark expanse, the freezing air biting his skin. The parachute pack on his back felt alien, a weight both reassuring and terrifying. His mind raced, trying to process the insanity of what had just happened. Somehow, he had jumped from a plane. And Elena was falling just above him, her silhouette barely visible against the stars. "Pull the cord," her voice carried faintly over the wind. Michael fumbled for the handle at his shoulder, his fingers numb. His instinct screamed at him to hesitate, but the rapidly approaching ground beneath silenced his doubts. He yanked the cord, and the parachute exploded above him, the sudden jerk nearly tearing his shoulders out of their sockets. The descent slowed abruptly, the rushing wind replaced by an eerie silence. Michael hung suspended, the world beneath him a patchwork of distant lights and shadowy terrain. "Elena?" he called out, his voice raw from the cold. "Here!" He spotted her to his left, her parachute unfurling against the night sky like a phantom. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. A distant sound reached his ears, a low, mechanical hum growing louder. Michael craned his neck, squinting into the dark. His stomach dropped as he saw it, a sleek, black helicopter slicing through the air, its searchlight sweeping the landscape below. "They're coming!" he shouted. Elena twisted in her harness, her voice cutting through the night. "We need to land now! Head for the clearing!" Michael followed her gaze, spotting a small patch of open ground surrounded by dense forest. It was their only option. "Let's hope this works," he muttered, steering the parachute toward the clearing. The descent felt agonizingly slow, every second punctuated by the growing roar of the helicopter. The spotlight swept dangerously close, its beam illuminating the tops of the trees. "Faster!" Elena urged, her voice taut with urgency. Michael hit the ground first, stumbling as his legs buckled beneath him. He scrambled to his feet, struggling to release the harness. Elena landed moments later, rolling to absorb the impact before cutting herself free. "Run!" she shouted, grabbing his arm. They sprinted toward the tree-line, the sound of the helicopter closing in like an angry wasp. Michael's lungs burned with every step, his heart pounding as adrenaline surged through his veins. The forest swallowed them, the dense canopy providing brief cover from the searchlight. Michael stumbled over roots and rocks, the terrain unforgiving. "This way!" Elena hissed, pulling him to the right. Michael followed blindly, his trust in her wavering, but his options non-existent. The hum of the helicopter grew fainter, but he knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. "Where are we going?" he panted. "There's a cabin nearby, Elena said, her voice breathless. We can hide there until they pass. How do you know about a cabin in the middle of nowhere? Elena didn't answer, her silence telling him everything he needed to know. They broke through the trees into a small clearing. In the center stood a weathered cabin, its windows dark and its door slightly ajar. This is your plan? Michael asked, incredulous. It's better than standing out here. Elena snapped, dragging him toward the door. Inside, the air was stale, the single room cluttered with abandoned furniture and cobwebs. Elena shut the door quietly, locking it with a rusted bolt. Michael leaned against the wall, catching his breath. Okay, he said finally. Now tell me the truth. Who are these people, and why are they trying to kill us? Elena paced the room, her hands raking through her hair. They're not trying to kill us, at least not yet. They want something. That much I figured out, Michael said, his frustration boiling over. But why me? Why are you dragging me into this? Elena stopped, her eyes meeting his. Because you're the only one who can stop them. Michael stared at her, his disbelief turning into anger. What does that even mean? I'm a tech consultant, Elena, not some secret agent. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. It's not about what you do now. It's about what you used to do. Michael's pulse quickened. What are you talking about? Elena hesitated, her gaze flicking toward the window as the faint hum of the helicopter returned. Remember the project you worked on at Vanguard Systems? The one you told me was classified? Michael froze, his mind flashing back to years ago when he'd been part of a think tank developing advanced encryption algorithms. What about it? Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. Those algorithms weren't just for protecting financial data. They were being adapted for something else, something far more dangerous. And now, the people chasing us think you have the key to accessing it. Michael's stomach twisted. That's insane. I don't have any of that data. I left Vanguard years ago. Elena took a step closer, her expression deadly serious. You may not have it, but they think you do. And they're willing to destroy everything to get it. Before Michael could respond, a deafening crash shattered the silence. The cabin door splintered inward, the rusted bolt giving way as two men in tactical gear burst inside. Get down! Elena shouted, shoving Michael behind the overturned table. The first man raised his weapon, a sleek rifle outfitted with a suppressor. But before he could fire, Elena lunged, grabbing a broken chair leg and swinging it with precision. The blow connected with his arm, sending the rifle clattering to the floor. Michael scrambled to his feet, adrenaline surging as he grabbed the rifle. He fumbled with the unfamiliar weapon, the weight awkward in his hands. Michael, move! Elena yelled, grappling with the second man. The first attacker recovered quickly, drawing a knife from his belt and advancing on Michael. Without thinking, Michael raised the rifle and swung it like a bat, the butt connecting with the man's temple. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Elena dispatched the second man with a brutal elbow to the jaw, sending him sprawling. We have to go now, she said, grabbing Michael's arm. What about them? He asked, gesturing to the unconscious men. They won't stay down for long, Elena said, already heading for the door. The hum of the helicopter was deafening now, the searchlight piercing through the treetops. Michael followed her into the night, his mind reeling. The danger was real, and the stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined. But one thing was clear, whoever these people were, they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted, or until Michael and Elena were dead. The forest was a blur as Michael and Elena sprinted through the underbrush, their breath visible in the cold night air. Behind them, the cabin lay in ruin, the sounds of splintering wood and muffled curses marking the failed ambush. Above, the helicopter searchlight cut through the treetops like a celestial predator, sweeping closer with each pass. Michael stumbled over a root, barely catching himself. How do we get out of this? They're everywhere. Elena grabbed his arm, her voice sharp. We keep moving. If we stay in one place, we're dead. Her words felt like an indictment, but Michael knew she was right. He pushed forward, his mind racing as adrenaline dulled his fatigue. The helicopter's spotlight flickered across their path, forcing them to dive behind a fallen tree. Michael pressed himself against the bark, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure it would give them away. Why are they so determined? He whispered, his voice raw. I don't have the algorithm, Elena. I've told you that. It doesn't matter, she replied, her voice tight. They think you do. And until we prove otherwise, they won't stop. Michael shook his head, frustration and fear bubbling over. This isn't just about me, is it? What aren't you telling me? Elena hesitated, her gaze flicking toward the sky where the helicopter loomed. This isn't the time. Make it the time, he snapped, his voice harsher than he intended. You dragged me into this. I deserve the truth. She closed her eyes briefly, as if bracing herself. When she opened them, her expression was one of raw guilt. I didn't leave you because I wanted to, she began, her voice trembling. I left because they gave me a choice. Stay, and they'd come for you, or disappear and take the risk alone. Michael stared at her, his breath catching. They threatened me, she nodded. The Vanguard algorithm isn't just a tool, it's a weapon. One that can break through any encryption system in the world. Banking, governments, military secrets, it's all on the table. And you were the lead designer, the only person who knew how to bypass the safeguards. Michael's stomach churned. That's not true. I worked on the framework, but I didn't have access to the final build. That was someone else's department. Elena's jaw tightened. That's not what they believe. And now they think I stole it and gave it to you for safekeeping. He stared at her, the weight of her words settling like a boulder on his chest. Why would they think that? Her silence was answer enough. Elena, Michael said, his voice low and dangerous. What did you do? Before she could respond, a new sound cut through the night, a sharp metallic whine. Michael turned his head, just in time to see a drone swooping low, its red light blinking ominously. Move! Elena shouted, pulling him up. The drone unleashed a burst of gunfire, the bullets tearing through the foliage as they ran. Michael's legs burned as he followed Elena, the weight of the rifle in his hand slowing him down. Ahead, the forest gave way to a rocky slope that descended into a shallow river. Over here, Elena called, veering toward the water. Michael hesitated. Are you insane? They'll see us. That's the point, she said, already sliding down the embankment. Michael had no choice but to follow. The icy water soaked through his shoes and jeans, numbing his legs instantly. Elena splashed downstream, the drone's whine growing louder as it hovered overhead. They're tracking us, Michael shouted. Not for long, Elena yelled back, her eyes scanning the riverbank. She stopped suddenly, her gaze locking onto a partially submerged metal grate. Michael followed her line of sight. What is that? An old service tunnel, she said, wading toward it. Michael balked. How do you know about this? No time for explanations, she snapped, yanking at the grate. Help me! Reluctantly, Michael waded over and gripped the rusted bars. Together, they pulled until the grate broke free with a metallic groan. Elena slipped inside first, motioning for him to follow. The tunnel was pitch black and reeked of mildew. Michael crawled in, the sound of the drone fading behind him. Elena reached into her jacket and pulled out a small flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. "We're safe for now, but not for long." Michael leaned against the wall, his chest heaving. "Safe? They're hunting us like animals." Elena crouched beside him, her expression serious. "Michael, listen to me. The algorithm is still out there. If they get it, the world as we know it changes forever. Wars could be started. Economies could collapse. Everything falls apart." Michael stared at her, the enormity of the situation sinking in. "You're saying this is bigger than us?" She nodded. "It always was. But there's one thing you need to know." "What?" Elena hesitated, then looked him straight in the eye. "The algorithm isn't lost. It's hidden." Michael's blood ran cold. "Hidden where?" Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Inside you." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael felt as though the ground had been pulled out from beneath him. "That's impossible," he said, shaking his head. "I don't remember anything like that." Elena placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm. "You don't remember because they wiped your memory. It was the only way to protect the data, and you. But now they know, Michael. They figured it out. That's why they're after us." Michael felt the room spin, his thoughts a chaotic storm. "You knew this the whole time?" "I only found out recently," she admitted. "That's why I came back. To warn you. To protect you." Michael pulled away, his mind reeling. "You didn't come back for me. You came back for the algorithm." "That's not true." Elena protested. "I care about you, Michael. I always have." The sound of distant footsteps echoed through the tunnel, cutting their argument short. "They're here," Elena said, her voice a whisper. Michael raised the rifle, his hand shaking. "What do we do now?" Elena's gaze hardened. "We fight. And we figure out how to end this once and for all." The footsteps in the tunnel grew louder, the echo amplifying the tension as Michael and Elena crouched in the darkness. The dim flashlight in Elena's hand flickered ominously, casting long shadows on the grimy walls. Michael tightened his grip on the rifle, his palms slick with sweat. "Tell me there's a plan," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. Elena's jaw tightened. "We don't fight them head-on. The goal is to draw them out and use the algorithm against them." Michael stared at her, his disbelief palpable. "How do you expect me to use something I don't even remember having?" She looked at him, her expression torn between desperation and determination. "It's still in there, Michael. Hidden. We just have to trigger it." Before Michael could demand an explanation, the beam of a tactical flashlight pierced the darkness, followed by a voice. "Grayson! Forward! There's nowhere left to run." Michael froze. He recognized that voice, the calm, methodical tone of the man from the plane. Elena grabbed his arm, her whisper urgent. "Trust me. We need to lead them deeper into the tunnel. There's an access point ahead." Michael's instincts screamed against the idea, but he nodded. "Fine. Let's go." They moved quickly but silently, the cold water splashing around their ankles. Behind them, the men advanced methodically, their light sweeping the tunnel. "We know about the algorithm," the man called out. "Give it to us, and this ends peacefully." Michael's breath caught. Their pursuers weren't just hunting them, they were taunting them. "They're trying to get into your head," Elena whispered. "Ignore them." Michael clenched his jaw, forcing himself to focus. The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to stoop as they moved. Up ahead, Elena's flashlight revealed a rusted metal door. "This is it," she said, pushing against the heavy frame. It groaned in protest, but eventually gave way, revealing a dimly lit utility room. The space was cramped, filled with old electrical panels and outdated equipment. Elena hurried inside, motioning for Michael to follow. "They'll find us in here," he hissed, glancing over his shoulder. "They're supposed to," she replied cryptically, dropping her pack and pulling out a small laptop. "What are you doing?" Michael demanded as she booted it up. "Activating the failsafe," she said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Before he could press her further, the door behind them slammed open. The suited man from the plane stepped in, flanked by two armed operatives. Michael instinctively raised the rifle, but the man simply smiled, his hands casually at his sides. "Mr. Grayson," he said, his voice calm, "it's time we talked." Michael's finger hovered over the trigger. "Stay back." The man ignored him, his gaze shifting to Elena. "Still trying to save the world, Miss Ford? How noble of you. But we both know how this ends." Elena didn't look up from the laptop. "You have no idea how this ends." The man's smile faltered. "You're wasting time. The algorithm is already compromised." "Give it to us, and you might walk away from this." Michael's grip on the rifle tightened. "She said I'm the algorithm. What does that even mean?" The man's eyes gleamed. "It means you're the key to everything, Mr. Grayson. Your mind holds the blueprint, the only way to unlock the program's full potential. And it's about time we retrieved it." Michael took a step back, the weight of his realization crashing down on him. "You're not just after the algorithm. You want me." The man's smile returned, smart as ever. "Michael!" Elena shouted, her voice sharp. "Stall him." "Stall him?" Michael shot back, panic rising. "How am I supposed to do that?" The man tilted his head, his patience waning. "Enough games. Come with us now, and this doesn't have to get messy." Michael swallowed hard, his mind racing. Then an idea struck him, reckless, but his only shot. "What happens if I don't remember?" he asked, his tone laced with defiance. The man's expression darkened. "We have ways of recovering the data. And if you kill me in the process?" Michael pressed, taking another step back. "What then? Your golden key is gone forever." The man hesitated, his confidence faltering. Behind him, his operative shifted uncomfortably. "You're bluffing," the man said, his voice less certain. Michael's lips curled into a faint smile. "Am I?" Before the man could respond, Elena's laptop emitted a shrill beep. She looked up, her expression triumphant. "Got it. What did you do?" the man demanded, his calm veneer cracking. Elena smirked. "I activated the encryption failsafe. You wanted the algorithm? Too bad, it's locked forever. Even Michael couldn't access it now." The man's face contorted with rage. "You're lying." "Try me," she shot back. The operatives raised their weapons, but before they could act, the utility room's overhead lights flickered violently. A deep, mechanical hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. "What's happening?" Michael asked, his voice trembling. "The failsafe," Elena said, grabbing his arm. "It's triggering a self-destruct protocol for the entire system." "You're insane!" the man shouted, backing toward the door. Elena smirked. "You shouldn't have cornered us." The hum reached a deafening crescendo. The lights exploded, plunging the room into darkness. "Run!" Elena screamed, pulling Michael toward a hidden exit. They stumbled through the chaos, the sound of shouts and gunfire echoing behind them. The tunnel ahead glowed faintly, a distant light guiding their escape. Michael's legs burned, his lungs screaming for air. "What now?" Elena glanced back, her expression grim. "We disappear. For real this time." Michael's heart sank. "And if they find us again?" She hesitated, then looked him in the eye. Then we fight again. Because some things are worth it. The faint glow grew brighter as they neared the exit. The cool night air hit Michael's face like a jolt of electricity, filling him with equal parts relief and dread. As they disappeared into the forest, he couldn't shake the feeling that their fight was far from over. But for now, they were alive. And for now, that was enough.